Okay, so we'd actually planned this months ago, and it turned out that there's a faculty council meeting at the same time. But because we advertised it widely, we're doing it today. So that's why some of the professors won't be able to join us that would have otherwise. But I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Tam and Perry and get to hear a little bit more about her research. So Tam is a social work professor at Wayne State University, just across the border in Detroit. But she has unusual hats for a social work professor in that she's done a combined PhD in both anthropology and social work. So we're going to see some of that nuanced understanding in what she's presenting to us today about aging in place, and health. And she's the only other social worker I know who's really interested in lead-related issues in older adults. So we were fortunate enough to meet last year and have had a lot of great discussions as Tam's been a visiting professor here all semester. So just a few other things. So what she's doing is ethnographic research on housing transitions of older adults from a network perspective. And she's really looking at how the health, mobility, and kin and peer networks are altering, and how do older adults think about their home and transitions at that point. We'll hear more about it. She's been well funded by all kinds of great places like the National Institute on Aging and the Hartford Foundation, and both University of Michigan and Wayne State. And she's doing this new research project in Detroit on relocation around gentrification issues. So with no further ado, welcome. Thanks.
Okay, let's see. So thank you so much for having me today, and I hope that everyone interested in the topic. I guess the topic today has got a couple parts. So I'm going to talk about my own research on aging and housing in Detroit, Michigan. And then I'm going to talk about a group I'm involved with called Age Social Work, for all the maybe social workers in the room. And then I'm going to talk about a community outreach project from the Michigan Center for Urban African American Aging Research. So this is my background, and for all the social workers in the room, my first degree was in mathematics. So I did a very keen turn, and then later became an anthropologist social worker. So any path can happen in academia, that's for sure. Also, I used to work as a social worker, so a lot of sort of clinical experience is really useful when you become a faculty member in social work. So I worked in the country of Singapore at the National Council of Social Service and at a counseling center for seniors called Singapore Action Group of Elders. But I will say, the reason I came to Toronto to be a visiting professor is to learn how Toronto was planning for its aging population. And so I've had lots of great meetings with people in the City of Toronto Senior Services Division, et cetera. And it was very similar to, it was kind of coming for a circle because I used to do that same work in Singapore. Like my job was similar to the City of Toronto people's employees I've been meeting. So it's been really exciting to come back to sort of where, think about a planning hat. And I guess in a lot of ways, I didn't think of myself as an urban planner, but I guess in a lot of ways, anyone who's studying aging within cities has to think of themselves in sort of how are people planning for these places. And so this Lefebvre quote it always resonates with me, sorry. The freedom to make and remake our cities and ourselves is, I want to argue, one of the most precious yet most neglected of our human rights. And so I've been thinking a lot about that in the work I'll talk to you about today. So I did a project on seniors who were forcibly displaced in the city of Detroit. And the reason they were forcibly displaced is because our government housing called HUD, Housing and Urban Development, HUD housing, you have a contract to provide it. So if someone owns a building, they might have a contract for 20 or 30 years. But when that contract expires, they don't have to provide it. And so I think, because I've been talking to lots of people in Toronto, it seems like the housing market's going so crazy in Toronto, as you can relate to. In Detroit, it's also starting, not in the same way, but in small pockets, landlords who used to provide HUD housing are now saying it's more advantageous for me to rent apartments at market rate. So then what was happening is seniors were being displaced out of this low income housing. So that's the stories I've been tracking from a research perspective. So this Davidson is an urban planner, and come on in. I think it's interesting, this quote. It says, put simply, displacement understood purely as a social dislocation tells us very little about why it matters. We miss the very space-place tensions that make space a social product. And so being an anthropologist, being someone who looks at how are lived experiences experienced by people, by an individual and by families, it became of great interest to me when this started happening in Detroit. So I also will tell you how this relates to my dissertation for any gerontologists out there. So my dissertation, I followed 81 seniors through the process of moving. And it took a long time to follow them. And I worked at garage sales, and I've given many talks on getting screamed at because I used too much tape when I was helping people pack boxes, etc. But I did all this stuff in order to try to understand from an anthropological perspective what it was like to move as a senior and how you make these decisions. And I think of it, and I've written about this in 3 ways. Emotionally, what do people want? Where do they want to live? Who do they want to be near? Financially, what people can people afford? And then health-wise, what are the health needs of someone, and how does that relate to their housing? So it was interesting when I did my dissertation on people voluntarily moving. I got a job at Wayne State University in Detroit, where seniors were being forced to move, so involuntary relocation. So it actually followed nicely from my initial interest. And so we project as senior advocates, which I guess I'm a part of, that about 2,000 Detroiters are going to face this in the next decade. So while I'm tracking one building and what happened to seniors, we also are trying very hard to advocate for policy to look at how to address this concern on a citywide level. And then I guess, I don't know if I wondered today if I should change the national demographic to U.S. demographics. So when I mean national, I mean U.S. But I would say we know that in the U.S., and I think in Canada too, because I've been to several meetings about this, that people are very worried about affordable housing. Is anyone in this room worried about affordable housing? Yeah? Is everyone in this room worried about affordable housing? In a lot of ways, there are advocates who look at sort of housing issues that really say housing is the centerpiece of stability for most people's lives. And so when it becomes unstable, when you don't know if you're going to be displaced, its impact on physical and mental health. It's hard to show those ties, but I think people experience great anxiety and challenge if they don't know if they have stable housing. And then there are local figures in Detroit. So I'm with a group that we track actually all the properties provided by HUD housing. And then we have this number of 2,000. So what's also happening in Detroit since I started this study is that in addition to the government housing, people being displaced from government housing, people are now being displaced by landlords who can get more from the next renter. And I think that's happening in Toronto too. So initially we really were worried about government housing, and actually the group that I'll tell you about, we started on this one street in Detroit called Woodward, or Main Street, and Bloor, I guess. And we said, okay, let's worry about seniors and housing on this one street. And we felt like that. So that was the numbers of the 52 housing units sort of in that corridor. We've now expanded our geographic reach to worry about more HUD housing being lost, as well as these other things. I want to just tell you, for any theoretical people in the room, that there's a lot of ways to think about housing and seniors, and I just want to show you some of the influences I've had. So there are a lot of people that have written about what a home means to a senior and what possessions mean to seniors. And in a lot of ways, things like how possessions mean a passing down of legacies, inheritances, etc. Um, People have also looked at why do seniors relocate. Sometimes it's death of a spouse. Sometimes it's I want to retire to a place like Florida. But but now I think actually even people have looked at seniors in natural disasters, like, okay, a hurricane comes through and seniors have to relocate, or a nursing home closes and seniors have to relocate. So I think there's a lot of people trying to understand what are triggers to relocation. And then there's a lot of the the original theory is from 1973. There's a lot of thought about how the environment presses against you as you age. So this idea that your home might be fine when you're younger, but then as you change, either physically or cognitively, your relationship to your home might change, and people call that environmental press. People have looked at sort of older adults and sort of how moving happens in process. And I would say I'm one of the few people that really studied this sort of, not everyone wanted to get into the like, what happens when you're actually planning a move? How do people get out of one house and into another house? But certainly my dissertation work contributed to that. And then I think, and I'll talk about this coalition I'm very active with in Detroit. So there are people who study coalitions and what happens when agencies and academics get together and try to make change. People looking at the impact of gentrification on health. Housing as a commodity is the last thing. So I think there's this idea of like, is housing a commodity that can be bought or sold, or should it be more thought of as a human right? And so people really differ in that. The language as a system of difference I included because I'm trained as a linguistic anthropologist. And so in a lot of ways, I think a lot in this displacement process about how letters written that people can't understand, the everyday people can't understand, really affects your ability to advocate for yourself or know what's happening. And so linguistic anthropologists would call that sort of language creates systems of difference, so that like someone who isn't comfortable in a classroom might think like, oh, this is beyond me, but it's also in a way the way people speak. And so in my own teaching, I think a lot about democratizing research, that researchers don't have to speak in ways that the everyday person can't understand. And I would say for my own research on housing, every family knows and goes through, should someone stay in their home or not? It's a very simple research question. You can make it very theoretical, but it's actually a very simple question that I think every family goes through at some stage. So I'm reporting on quickly what happened when we've been doing interviews with these seniors who were displaced. And so we've been tracking them for a few years. This one 93-year-old who had lived at her building 28 years. So if you think about that, 28 years is a long time to live anywhere. And then this idea of information and the letters as part of this first thing. So this woman says, I thought it was horrible. I thought it was terrible. I didn't know what in the world they're talking about. None of us did. We had a dozen meetings with the different companies, the different people, and it left us all in a nervous state. So this was repetitive, common throughout my interviews, which was sort of people would come to meetings in a senior building and people had no idea what they're actually saying. And that was, it's good information to have, because then that's something you can advocate for. That can you make sure that the meetings are held in a way that people leave the meeting with understanding what's going to happen. And so people were given a letter that said you're going to be displaced in a year, but then other people got information like, oh, we don't really have to read that letter, etc. So this is part of the saga that happened in this building. And then there's sort of the role of community. And I would say, like, I think in a lot of ways, people, if you think of housing as a commodity, then you think of it in terms of a Marxist sense of like it's interchangeable. But as many people know, where you live and where you feel comfortable and where you feel safe is really individualized. It's very hard to replicate that even down the block or down 3 blocks. And so what we are also finding in the interviews is how tight this community was. And then if you think about it, seniors, they had a way that they would check on each other. they would check down the hallway if someone needed it. So all those things happen over time that were immediately kind of drastically lost when these seniors, which were, I guess I could tell me more details, like 100 seniors were displaced throughout the city. They sort of lost those. So I think we've been looking at that, the role of the networks. And then I would say the actual impact of the move itself. So here are people, they're given the letter that they had to move. They really didn't know, is anyone going to help us move? Then also, the company that owned it started construction, literal construction, while people were still in the building. And so people really were very concerned about like the health impact of like being in a building while it was under construction, for sure. So that's what this quote reveals. And then, and actually, the church, who was a community partner in this research, they actually filed a class action lawsuit to stop the construction. So there's more to this story. I'm trying to synopsize a big project. But what was cool about this project, it was a partnership funded by the Hartford Foundation, but between me, a researcher, a church down the street that was the closest church to this apartment building, and a tenant organizing group. So it was really cool. And then we involved students from both social work and nursing from 5 different universities to help us with the project. So it's ongoing. It's been a very exciting project. But I think this goes to a larger point, which in a way I've come to Toronto to kind of find out these very things. Sort of, what are the role of seniors as a city changes? And in fact, I was writing some interview questions today about sort of these very issues about sort of as the city of Toronto changes, how are seniors being incorporated, et cetera. So these are sort of questions we asked our Detroiters, and there was a lot about sort of gentrification often is seen in terms of certain groups being moved out and others sort of being elevated. And so we were trying to figure out how seniors felt about sort of their role in the city. And then I think there's big implications of my work for social work. So in a lot of ways, you know, people are always assessing the suitability of their residents and whether modifications can happen. It's way cheaper in the long run to like be able to modify your current house if you own it, say, or if there's reasons for you to stay. So there are a lot of city programs in many cities about sort of modifications. So in Detroit, because Detroit is a city with 39.4% of people living in poverty, so people have roofs that the rain comes in and they have to have buckets because they can't fix their roofs. They have inaccessible homes as far as stairs and just entryways. So there are a lot major infrastructure problems with the declining homes in Detroit, for sure. And even our government housing, our HUD housing, it really wasn't made accessible when it was created. So there's a lot of sort of how do you retrofit a current apartment, et cetera. And then thinking about who's involved, like sometimes the senior themselves are not the person making the decision, but it's a family member in some way. And so sort of trying to understand that. And our group, this group I've been involved with, which I'll show you the paper, we created the only, that I know of, relocation assessment tool for seniors out there. And so we put it in the literature, and I think like we're hoping that other cities could use it, but we actually had a lot of social workers on the ground. We worked to create this relocation assessment tool. So I always try to advertise that. Oh, sorry, smaller. And then I think we also have to think about, for social work policy issues, sort of advocating for housing options across the spectrum, socioeconomic spectrum. And in the US, we have things called housing trusts, which different cities have funded, so it's like a bank account, to provide affordable housing. So different cities have different ways they fund them. So some of them have a continual income stream, like a percentage of a real estate tax or something. But people are getting creative ways to fund it. And then can they sort of do something with that pot of money to promote affordable housing? And then I would say, out of my project I just described quickly, we really came to understand that there was a lot of mental health support needed for people who were forced to relocate, that either group or individual sort of therapeutic support was very helpful to people when they were really, really anxious about what was going to happen to them. So I also want to tell you I'm very involved in a coalition in Detroit called Senior Housing Preservation Detroit. And we spent a lot of time developing our values. So ensuring a safe, wholesome place for seniors to live, ensure affordable housing at 30% or below. So the AMI is the area median income. And we decided we would put the amount that is, so $14,450 US for a single family household in 2018. Prioritize project-based Section 8, meaning that if we have government housing, so HUD housing is Section 8 is one type of HUD housing. If we have government housing and money for it, we should try really hard not to lose it. So that's what that means. But we also know sometimes preserving housing, we're not opposed to building new housing. And in the city of Detroit, it's different because Toronto seems really full. But in Detroit, we have 83,000 abandoned homes, literally abandoned. Like the mayor is spending millions of dollars on blight removal, where you bulldoze houses, because if not, you could have like crack houses and other things that happen, and then people just like setting them on fire anyway. So they feel like one solution for crime is to like remove them. But so we have a lot of land in the city of Detroit, I would say, almost to the point that people are saying there's an urban bird population now. Birds are migrating, so that's exciting. But on the other hand, we also feel like preservation, when people say we want to preserve housing, I think urban planners and people we hear in Washington now, they say they're more expansive about the ability to sort of, sometimes that the house that is preserved is kind of run down, not accessible, etc. And so people are saying, well, maybe to preserve a city's overall housing for seniors, we can create new housing. So that's one I want to point out. Provide a supportive environment, encourage self-actualizing programs that yield a nourishing and rewarding life, and assure effective communication among participating parties. And this is, our coalition has at least 17 member agencies, and we are always communicating between each other. And I would say here are the list of our agencies, including the Wayne State University School of Social Work. But we have developers at the table, nonprofit developers. We have the Health Authority for our city. We have United Community Housing Coalition, which is the largest housing coalition, etc. And I want to just tell you that our work, we formed in 2013 basically because these seniors were being evicted and they kept calling all these agencies around town, and someone said, oh, we should have a coalition to look at this, and we don't need every agency to receive all these phone calls. So we've been working since 2013 every month, and the Wall Street Journal, the Wall Street Journal did a story on us, our coalition. So that was very exciting. And then we've also been we've been funded by the John A. Hartford Change Agents Project, and then we were featured in their report. I also would say, any of you in the publishing world, this has been a way that I've co-published with my community partners. So like Don Leach is the deacon of St. Aloysius Church, and he was very a part of this initial work that I'm talking about. So he was a co-author. This is a big aging foundation. This is my tenant organizer co-author, and this is my MSW student. In addition, Claudia, who's the tenant organizer, is always on it, and then Dennis Archambault is at the Health Authority. So I've been able to take this work on our coalition and really try to publish with it. In fact, I guess this paper was invited by the Public Policy and Aging Report, as well as sort of provide opportunities for students, and we've done a lot with this space. And even our state senator from Detroit, her chief of staff attends our coalition every month now. So that's exciting that we have politicians involved, et cetera. And I guess the other thing that's even, oh, we made a video. I didn't think I'd have time to show it, but it's a really cool video. So I will say, if you have any chance to watch our 11-minute video, it's really cool. You can just Google like holding down the fort, seniors' perspectives on belonging, and you'll find the video, or you can just take it. But I would say the video, we show this video around town all the time, and it's very cool. And it was made by a filmmaker that went on to do great work in Flint, Michigan, at community meetings in a different video. So she's a very famous documentary maker, I guess. Okay, I'm gonna skip, but I'll tell you how to find the video. So the city of Detroit, like the city of Toronto, the city departments actually take what we as a senior housing preservation coalition advocate for pretty seriously. So in their latest sort of what they're going to do for affordable housing in the city, they thanked us right here. And honestly, the head of the department, we have constant contact with. So if they have policy ideas, they ask our coalition, they come and visit our coalition and say, we need to have 15 minutes. And so I would say it's sort of been a great direct action. So the tenant organizer, Claudia, who was my co-author, she's the chair of our coalition. And the mayor has asked Claudia, but we're all working on it, to produce a report on what we should do on senior housing in the next 20 years. So we're working on that report when I'm not doing an ethics application for this University of Toronto for my Toronto project. And it's exciting that the mayor in the last 2 state of the city addresses, like it's a once a year address, he mentioned senior housing, and I think it's because of some of our work. And here are key questions. And then I'm going to transition, but definitely know I'm passionate about housing. If you had to meet me off the street, you would know I'm passionate about senior housing. But I also wanted to just take a moment to talk about this group, because someone told me that you don't have something like this in Canada, and I do, although I stand corrected if you do. But we have an organization called Age Social Work, and in January I'm going to be the president. So I'm vice president now, but it's turning fast. So the student membership rate is really cheap, $25. And also, we welcome you. And then if you're a student member, you get a newsletter that keeps you apprised of like aging issues and then job announcements, et cetera. Jessica went to our reception at the gerontology meetings. What did you think? She won a free book. She won a free book. Oh, and it's like a relationship with Springer Publishing. Yeah, Springer, is that right? I'm hoping it's Springer. If I'm plugging over, sorry. I think it's Springer. We've had a 21-year relationship with Springer, and they give us free books to give away at our book giveaway. And so we are, so again, this is the American context. We are We are very active at the Gerontological Society of America meetings. They just happened last week, a week and a half ago, in Austin, Texas. Jessica got to go. Esme got to go. Some of your other professors go. Some of you are going next year. I'll be there because I'm there every year. But we have, so that's what Age Social Work does. The other thing is, for any of you who want to publish, is Age Social Work runs its own journal. And what we understand is and this is a Taylor and Francis journal, by the way, it's funny. I don't know. It says Rutledge, but now it's definitely Taylor and Francis, so I'm not sure about that, unless they're a subsidiary. But I would say, the Journal of Gerontological Social Work around the world is the only niche journal for gerontological social work. So Taylor and Francis is very excited about our journal. We just got an impact factor, et cetera. So that's another thing. So as president, I'm sort of also overseeing this journal. I'm not the editor of the journal, but I'm certainly aware of the journal for sure. Yes. Nice. Oh, this is exciting. Right. It's the only one in the world. I would say it's the only one in the world. And in fact, we're getting so many international submissions that we're very excited. Like it's now recognized. Like we have submissions from Iran and Turkey and a lot from China, Jordan, etc. So it's become more and more a place where gerontological social workers around the world can share information. So I point you to that. The other thing is for any PhD students, I want to just throw this out there, this thing called the Fellows Meeting. So we have, if you're a first or second year doc student in aging, doing aging work, and you got it, like you can't miss out because it's first or second year. So sometimes people miss out by the time. So I would say faculty and people here should like promote this. We have a great mentoring program for 10 pre-dissertation fellows every year. We call it our pre-dis program. But they come a day early to GSAs, so they come on a Wednesday, and they get mentoring by some of the top gerontological social workers in the country. And we just like, it's an intensive program where we have so many scholars meet them, and most people who participate in the program are highly excited about it, and then they have their own alumni reception. We have our own, the whole community's reception, and I would say there are 150 gerontological social workers in that room. So if you ever come to the gerontology meetings next year or years from now, come to look up our events. Yes. Right. Right. Well, as the president, I can know who funds it because I fundraise for it. I would say it is. I think it's open to anyone now because we are just funding from our own sort of pool of. Yes, so I think actually it would be really nice to see a Canadian or two there. The last thing I want to spend like 5 minutes on, and before questions, I got to participate in this symposium at the last gerontology meetings, and I just want to point you to. I told Esme about this. This was really chaired in a lot of ways by a woman named Carol Estes, who's one of the most famous gerontologists. You may run across her work. So 2 years ago, at the 2018, a year ago at the 2018 gerontology meetings, they had a 60-year tribute to her contributions to gerontology. And she's from the University of California, San Francisco. She's trained so many people along the way, because of course, 60 years, right? So her new book is about emancipatory gerontology, and I don't know if you can read it, but I'll try to read these first few lines because I really love the passion of it. So it says, emancipatory gerontology signals gerontology's turn toward advancing marginalized people's rights and subjugated discourses by interrogating power, promoting anti-oppressive practices, and encouraging activist scholarship in aging studies. This symposium presents scholars who are elevating emancipatory praxis in gerontology for the 21st century. And I will say, Carol also gave us free pins. And so the pin I'm wearing says, Black, Brown, Indigenous Aging Rise. And so she's got this whole thing about who's been left out of research, who's been left out of the conversation about aging. And so my very last thing is actually, as much as I do as my own research on advocacy in Detroit. How is it? Okay, little white, sorry. I guess I'll go back here. I was asked to be on this panel, and I wasn't sure what I would present on. I'm like, am I an emancipatory gerontologist? It's a question. And then I thought, you know what? The work we do with our research registry is part of this process. So I want to tell you about it. So the title of the talk I gave in this session was Interrogating Research Participant, Registries, Lessons Learned and the Roads Ahead. And so my co-authors, so I'm from Wayne State. We have Michigan and Michigan State. We have 3 major universities as a part of this. And I was trying to figure out, do you know what a research registry is? Well, that's one question. I'll answer it quickly. It is when people sign up and say, you can call me if you have a project and I'll see if I want to participate. So you're not committing to doing a project. You're just being on a list. It's like a phone list. And it is for us phone, because our people on our registry, we don't email them. We literally call them. And so what happens is researchers know that we run a registry and they approach us. And then if they pass muster, we say, okay, we will ask people on our list if they're interested in your project. So I want to talk about that. But I also was trying to figure out, is this emancipatory? Is this, promoting social justice? And so I thought of 3 ways. 1, flipping the script by highlighting experiences, promoting capacity building, and facilitating accountability. So this is me, and these are my partners, and I'm hoping you can see this, but perhaps I'll read it. So this is funded by the National Institute on Aging. So the center I'm about to talk about, which is called the Michigan Center for Urban African American Aging Research, is in its 22nd year of funding. So it's really remarkable. And we just got from 22nd to 27 years. So we're good to go for a while. So this is one of the centers that the NIA has designated in the U.S. called the Resource Centers for Minority Aging Research. And what's very interesting about that is that they realized 20 years ago, there wasn't special initiatives for minority aging research. And so different schools, universities got together. And so for a long time, I think we are the only urban African American aging research center. In Alabama, and they have one called the Deep South one, which is for rural African American aging research. On the West Coast, they have one at UCLA for Latino aging research. They have one at University of Washington for Native American aging research. So, but we are the only for urban African American aging research. And so that's us. And then we run a Healthier Black Elders Center, which I'll tell you about. And our registry is called the Participant Research Pool. So when I say registry, I mean the PRP, the Participant Research Pool, Resource Pool. So, and here are the 2 goals of our center. We call it MICWAR. We want to promote high quality scholarly research focused on health disparities and health promotion among older racial and ethnic minorities. And then we want to provide health education that is relevant to the needs of older minority community members in Detroit. And provide community-based training for young minority health science scholars. So we train scholars. So when I mean scholars, I mean PhD, PhD students, postdocs, and new professors, young assistant professors. And we give pilot money. And then, we are very proud of this record. That of the 60 people have completed this, 70% of them African American, 2/3 of them, including myself, in a tenured university professors. And then of all the 18 RICMARs across the country, MICWAR has the most publishing and grants. We're very excited about that too. But this idea that we need minority scholars and research. So we have different mechanisms about training scholars who are minorities. But then the opportunities for research for people. So instead of being overlooked, so there's a statistic from the University of Michigan Alzheimer's Center that says in the first 25 years of the Alzheimer's Center at the University of Michigan, until 2008, there were 3 African Americans in their studies. That's pretty drastic if you think about it. And at Wayne State, our city is 82% Black, so we have more in research, but this mechanism has also gotten more older Black African American Detroiters in research. So in a lot of ways, instead of people's stories being overlooked, being in studies and being in our program has provided opportunities for health education and meeting researchers and agencies serving seniors, and the opportunity for sharing people's stories. So I just put it as it's one step closer to reducing marginalization. If your story isn't even included, it's shocking, right? So how we do this is we have a newsletter, and I want to share. This is actually a list of our events. It's just hard to see, but we give health talks, 8 to 10 a year on diabetes, chronic diseases, sleep health, dental health, you name it, health. And so our philosophy in MICWAR for our participant research pool is to give back first. So we give health education live, and we have like 90 seniors coming to all of our programs. We give health information in our newsletters. And then, so here are sort of our events and you get a free Blocks lunch too. And we have health screenings in the back. So we've been doing this whole sort of mechanism for a long time in Detroit. We're very explained. So in the 4 years, we had 2,281 older adults. So this is my community outreach house. So I guess I'm the faculty. We have a project director who like makes it happen, which is good. So I can live in Toronto and still be a part of this. But I would say this programming is extensive and well known throughout our city. So I think it's made seniors feel really comfortable with researchers, and then they're interested possibly in joining studies. Also, I strongly say if you don't want to join a study, it's still voluntary. You can come and be a part of our program and not be asked to be in studies if you know. So again, that's what it means when research is voluntary. The other part of my thing, which I think is interesting, is we have a community advisory board, which are a few people, like maybe 10 to 12, I think, and they attend these CAB meetings. So as one of my roles for this grant is I run the CAB meetings with my other co-directors, I guess. And but what's very interesting is instead of being overlooked in the research design process and ethical deliberation, we are trying really hard to build the capacity of our CAB members so that when a researcher wants to have access to the registry that we spent a lot of time cultivating, we have over 1,300 members now, we want to make sure that these CAB members feel empowered to ask researchers tough questions. And then I think this is a step closer to democratizing research and creating best practices on research ethics. So in our last CAB meeting, which happened November 4th, we had a researcher call in wanting to do a study. Our CAB members grill them. What are you going to do? What are you going to do with the data? Have you given enough incentive? Have you thought about the ethics of this? So we've had trainings for our CAB members on the best practices if someone wants to do an MRI in their study or to take cortisol samples. Like our CAB members, I spend a lot of time thinking about like how to make these CAB members so proficient. And I say we have complex research discussions. So like here's an example on this, like of one slide of like, what are the different purposes of research, which you might get in a master's level research class. We are doing this with our CAB members to make sure they can vet these research proposals. And then we actually established a proposal review process. So we have to have at least 2 CAB members vote yes in order to let a researcher have access to our list. So we had to invent a tiebreaker process because like one time one said yes and one said no. And so then someone said, well, Tam, we just trust you because you're trustable. And I said, well, I don't think that's the point here. So I said, no, we can't have it just because I say it's a go. And so I said, okay, if the researchers in the room think, well, maybe there's some other way to look at this proposal for the people who are against it, we have to, in layperson's terms, explain why. And again, it's still a discussion as to whether with our sort of explanation whether the proposal gets approved. And then our CAB members also like help us with our what topics are important to seniors. But here's another thing. The midterm elections were last fall, and we're very concerned about 2020 in our country too, but the midterms were very big. So our CAB members said we need to have a program on voting. And they wanted to present what gerrymandering means. They wanted to present like histories of how people in their families were barred from voting. And also when paying poll taxes, like you had to pay to vote, which is illegal, but there were a lot of legal practices that barred people from voting. And they also wanted to talk about how their family members and they themselves dress up to vote, like that it is such a right and privilege. So this program we did, and we played Aretha Franklin at the beginning, was so exciting and inspiring. And And then we actually, the last thing I want to talk about before opening up is sort of, instead of this legacy of researchers just disappearing after you sort of do research and then you're off, we want to, our CAB and MICWAR is really promoting this diverse research dissemination approaches. So we invite our researchers to come back to us to the lunch and learns. We invite researchers to CAB meetings and they ask them a ton of questions. I mean, people bring in like printed out questions that they've established. We publish their results in our newsletter. And we've actually added questions about policy and dissemination to, like when they report, the researchers report to us, we say, have you ever, here it is. Oh, so small. We strongly encourage all of our researchers to bring their findings to community members and policymakers where possible. Please list the ways you have brought this, basically. And I guess I just wanted to end with sort of the road ahead for this one center, but it's sort of as a representation of sort of minority aging research in the States in some way, is that like for us in this latest round of funding, we were very excited that we added Michigan State because for the first 20 years, it was only 2 of the 3 major universities. We also added a new site. So instead of just doing outreach in Detroit, we're adding Flint. So we are doing the same type of thing in Flint. We had our first event on November 6th. And then we actually have been approached by so many other people about how we do this that we're actually starting a consultancy because researchers want help, centers want help as to how to run something like this. So, but that's that. And I guess I conclude with, thank you so much for your time. I'm happy to have any questions. Or comments? Sander.
Great work. I really enjoyed this talk. I think that, as you're talking, I keep hearing themes in terms of, capacity building and building relationships. And I'm just curious because as an academic, what are some of the challenges in terms of like building those relationships with the seniors or with the health agencies, with the policymakers, and what are some of the things that you've done to circumvent any challenges or strengthen those relationships? Some of the CAP stuff is great, but
yeah,
from the policy standpoint, where there's sometimes a lot of turnover, be it through elections or
right.
people switching positions, what are some of the things that come up and how do you address them?
Well, I think it's interesting because that's very glass half empty. But I'm going to say this about Toronto. Oh, yes. Repeat the question. So engaging with community members, different types of stakeholders can have its challenges. What are challenges that you find and how have you addressed them? So I would say one thing that's very different from the city of Detroit to the city of Toronto is we do not have a senior citizens department in the city of Detroit. We used to, and our city went bankrupt in 2014. So now, to me, we do not have, I'm sure this is going out live everywhere, we don't have many people looking at issues of seniors in the city departments. So it's interesting because you talked about turnover. Like people, what happens sometimes in cities is like a person could be in one department and then they get thrown over to another department. That I think because Detroit, we don't have a city senior citizens department. We don't have the same turnover at the city level in the same way. So that's one. I would say, as a professor, and this is my first job. My first job was at Wayne State, my only job, and I would say when you're starting out, you have a great need to publish because that is the name of the game in academia. The other thing to not forget is that you have a great need to spend time with your students because grading papers, teaching classes, etc. And so what I really tried to do is make all my activities count toward both of those. So I do tons of community work. Like, so now the state senator, Stephanie Chang from the city of Detroit, asked me and a couple other people to review her housing bills before she takes them to the state legislature. It's very exciting, but that kind of being a part of policy takes a lot of time on the ground. And I think just to acknowledge that. But I would say I tried very hard to publish articles that would count for what I was expected to do at the university with my community partners. I would also say, so I think for publishing, that was my strategy. I also wrote a lot of grants with community partners. And I would say sometimes when you get discouraged about sort of the time investment to do some of that, I would say I have never had getting letters of support, getting like people to really be on board with things happening at my university because of these relationships. So I think it's worked both ways for me in a lot of ways. You know, it's hard though. Community work is hard. And so, of course, if you have a staff person, so MICWAR, I think, has gotten so big that we have a project director who does the programming and the faculty can come in more and come out more. But I would say, I mean, where was I the month of November? I was at the launch in Flint facilitating what kind of programming do seniors want in Flint? And I took the time to be in Flint and Detroit because my fund, you know, like I take MICWAR and my involvement there and the funding very seriously. So I would say sometimes it's about letting some things go. Not every community partnership works out well. Like I showed you the best, but there's also things you like stop and start in. And I think to acknowledge that there's time lost with the ones that don't work out too. So I hope that was helpful. Yes.
I'm thinking about your research on relocation and urbanization and the hotels that you followed and that experience of having to relocate town. Did you get involved at all in trying to help find new housing for the older adults, or did you happen to work at all with community partners to assist the older adults as well?
I would say that's where the partnership was. So the persons I wrote the grant with, the major agency was the United Community Housing Coalition. And my partner in it is the tenant organizer who actually finds the housing for people. So she's in touch with everyone and literally getting them housing. So getting people housing is really hard because some people don't know sort of what housing is available. Sometimes filling out the applications, sometimes having a criminal background. So let's say you lived in an apartment for 25 years and then you're suddenly displaced, then your criminal background. So, but I would say with that, with the last part, we wrote a book chapter in a forensic social work book on sort of the housing challenges with the criminal background seniors and stuff. So I guess I tried. So for sure, the people on the ground are my research partners, and I mean I've spent enough time. So the other person that was the research partner was the parish nurse of St. Aloysius Church, and so she did if people needed medical care, and they came often to her for medical screenings and even glaucoma drops and stuff like that. So I think like figuring out which partnerships will make a research project go, and ensuring that people's basic needs, if they report them, are addressed. So there's an ethical practice to that if they report that, that we would have a mechanism. Well, I will leave you with this. Of course, there's a lot of housing work to be done with seniors and affordable housing in every city. And I think in a lot of ways, what I've found in coming to Toronto is that there are very similar struggles of people very worried about housing costs. So I will just say that I appreciate my time here today, and feel free to contact me if you have other questions.
So we just have a token of our appreciation, and
Thank you.
it was wonderful, your energy. And when I look at how much you're doing, I'm a little overwhelmed by how many balls you have in the air. It's really exciting, and you're making a difference on the ground. In the theory base, I knew, but to see such a difference on the ground. So congratulations, and a warm round of applause. So.
Thank you.
Please start your social work.